Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPD to advance excellent teaching.
What is mental illness? What causes it? Is it the result of early life experiences? Or is it caused by something in our genetic makeup? How can the study of twins help us better understand mental disorder? Psychopathology, this time on Discovering Psychology.
That's good. Just take that deep breath. That's good. We're going to have one more step.
I don't think anybody can help me.
Have you felt like this before?
Schizophrenia, agoraphobia, depression. These are just a few of the hundreds of ways in which the brain and mind, our greatest attributes, can turn against themselves. Because we can love, we can be jealous. Because we can remember the good, we can recall the bad and dwell on it. Because we can think about the future, we can fear its uncertainties. It's as if each coin of the psychological realm has one side that mocks and demeans the other.
They referred you here from the satellite clinic.
Psychopathology is the study of mental disorders. A mental disorder is defined as a clinically significant behavioral or psychological syndrome or pattern that occurs in an individual and that is typically associated with either a painful symptom or impairment in one or more important areas of functioning. What's the extent of such disorders? Several long-term studies reveal that about 1 out of every 5 Americans, 20%, suffer from some form of recently diagnosed mental disorder. That's tens of millions of people in the United States alone.
You're not going nowhere at all.
And these statistics may underestimate the problem. If we're going to help people with mental disorders, the first thing we have to do is identify them. Just having problems isn't enough to classify someone as having a mental disorder. We all have problems. Instead, a person's functioning has to be clearly abnormal. Not that the person is abnormal, but that some aspect of mental or behavioral functioning is off base. This judgment is made by observing the person's behavior, or analyzing scores on diagnostic tests, or evaluating reports by the person or by people who know him or her. Mental health specialists are trained to make these kinds of judgments. They include clinical psychologists who have PhDs in psychology, psychiatrists who are also medical doctors, and psychoanalysts who specialize in using Freudian techniques in their therapy.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
These specialists then determine which of the following criteria of mental disorders are met by an individual. Is he or she suffering, acting in ways that work against personal well-being, creating discomfort in others who feel threatened or distressed by his or her behavior? Other criteria come into play for more severe disorders, such as schizophrenia. Does the person act or talk irrationally, behave unpredictably from situation to situation? Is his or her appearance or actions extremely unconventional? The key here is a matter of degree. How much and how often a person's behavior matches these criteria. We need to classify mental illnesses for several very practical reasons. First, and most importantly, because knowing what type of disorder a person has helps us to plan an appropriate treatment. Second, for legal reasons, the courts may use psychiatric diagnosis to assess whether a person is competent to stand trial or to manage an estate. Third, for research purposes, to study different aspects of psychopathology and to evaluate treatments. And fourth, for economic reasons, to provide payments by insurance companies and health plans for certified cases of mental disorders. Of course, madness has been a part of the human condition from the very beginning. Prehistoric skulls, like this one, have been found with holes drilled into them. Some experts believe that these holes were a primitive attempt to release demons from within the brain. Until recently, the mentally disordered were perceived almost as animals, to be tortured, chained, and exhibited to a curious public, or lumped together with society's other problems, the poor and the criminal. Not until the 18th century were people with psychological problems finally seen as sick. It was the great French physician Philippe Pinel who first wrote, "The mentally ill, far from being guilty people deserving punishment, are sick people, whose miserable state deserves all the consideration that is due to suffering humanity." But such enlightenment was rarely shared by the public and the state. Moreover, the label of madness was often extended to anyone who challenged the status quo or was different. The French Impressionists, for example, were initially called crazy. In more recent times, political and religious dissidents in the Soviet Union have been incarcerated in mental institutions. This medicalization of deviance was also used to justify the treatment of slaves in this country. Blacks were said to suffer from a sensory disease that made them insensitive to pain when being punished. And it was also claimed that they suffered from a strange new disease, drapetomania, the obsession to seek freedom. One vocal critic of mental diagnosis, psychiatrist Thomas Zaz, argues that mental illness is in fact a complete myth. He sees the symptoms of mental illness as mere excuses for authorities to repress people who are different, who violate social norms. According to Zaz, there is no underlying mental illness in these people at all. Only medical labels used to justify their repression. It's an extreme position, rejected by many, but a provocative one that forces us to re-examine our assumptions about what's normal and what isn't. A different kind of criticism, but one that's just as provocative, has been leveled by David Rosenhan of Stanford University.
Between 1969 and 1972, a group of colleagues and I gained admission to psychiatric hospitals by faking a single symptom, which was that we said that we heard voices, and the voices said, empty, dull, thud. The moment we were admitted to the hospital, we abandoned our symptom, and we behaved the way we usually behave. The question was, would anyone detect that we were sane? The answer was no. No one ever did. Admitted with the diagnosis in the main of paranoid schizophrenia, we were discharged with the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia in remission. Now, in remission doesn't mean quite the same thing as sane. The term we use to describe the experience is dehumanized. Nobody talks to you. Nobody has any contact with you. The average contact of patients with staff was about 6.5 minutes a day. Nobody comes to visit. The first time I was in a psychiatric hospital, on an admissions ward with 41 men, my wife constituted 4 of the 7 visitors on a weekend.